Well, my name is Stephen Taylor, and I am the assistant headmaster at the Academy of Classical Christian Studies in Oklahoma City. That is our headmaster, Father Carr, and I am his lieutenant, assistant headmaster. Nate is very much the quintessential idea-driven entrepreneurial priest, and I am very much the operationally focused, follow him around. Yes, that idea. Can we not do that idea? Can we? Yes, here's how we can pay for that thing. And it's a pretty fun dynamic. If between you and your leadership team, you don't have some sort of fun dynamic of representing the complete creativity and idea generation that Nate Carr brings, find someone who's full of ideas and can't teach well, and figure out how to turn them into an administrator. And if in fact you are that person who has lots of ideas, surround yourself with people who like to turn ideas into plans and plans into actions. I really firmly believe that your school needs all three of those. You need the idea people, you need the process people, and you need the execution people. I think it's okay to have one person represent more than one of those camps, but you probably can't have one person represent all three of those camps. You have natural strengths. Lean into your strengths and surround yourself with the people who fill other strengths. In the last hour, Father Carr shared his vision of leading with culture. Your schools must lead with culture, and there's so much to say. I hope you all come to our joint talk tomorrow, where we talk quite literally about the fruit of leading with culture when it comes to administration. How do you lead meetings with culture? How do you lead boards with culture? How do you not hate your life after you've been in meetings all day long or staring at spreadsheets all day long? I personally love staring at spreadsheets all day long, so that's not a problem for me. But there are the things that you have to do. How do you keep culture at the center of your school while also managing the business aspects well? So we'll talk about some of that stuff tomorrow. In the last hour, Nate was very much dwelling in the richness of the cultural expressions of our schools. And today, this hour is very much dwelling in the richness of strategic plans. Because if you have this brilliant vision, you've figured out where you want to go, you still have to figure out how to get there. And then you have to figure out how to pay for it. And that takes intentionality and it takes fiscal discipline. And so nothing that I say here is original. I have copied shamelessly from ISM, Independent School Management. How many of you are familiar with independent school management? Okay, independent school management caters to private schools, generally with tuition price points higher than ours. They have fabulous resources. They're also very expensive training seminars. And so if you don't want to go to their 4-day, $5,000 training on strategic plans, this is the hour summary, and see if it's worth it. Because if you're at all intrigued, then go learn more. Go spend $5,000 and do more. That'll be really good. And then there's also some other tools that are integrated as well, but I do not take credit for any of this. I'm simply here to share some of what I've learned along the way. So the biggest thing about a strategic plan and why, I think, is represented in these two quotes. I have a lot of room for Winnie the Pooh. We read it in our house quite frequently. However, I always get to where I'm going by walking away from where I have been is not how you should lead your schools. Versus planning with the end in mind, having a destination, having a vision for where you're headed. If you only lead by knowing what you're not going to do, by going away from where you have been, then you are walking backwards your entire journey. You are looking in the rearview mirror and trying to drive by looking at the rearview mirror and walking away, driving away. It doesn't work. You have to have a vision for where you're headed. Strategic plans are merely a tool to organize all of the ideas of where you're headed. The church embodies the richness in its own traditions of where to go, of how to bring unique and amazing, life-giving culture to your schools. Strategic plans can help keep you on task so that you don't become scattered in the pursuit of those ideas. A quick comment on what are called purpose and outcome statements. That's the ISM language, purpose and outcome. Your purpose statement, also known as your mission statement. At our school, it's this: we assist parents in shaping students' affections for truth, goodness, and beauty for the benefit of man and the glory of Jesus Christ. Your purpose statement is very clear in why you exist, what you are seeking to do. Your vision statement is a little bit more geared towards outcomes. What's the result? What's the product? Our vision statement: we serve families through multiple classical Christian models to reform education in Oklahoma City, the state of Oklahoma, the nation, and world. That's what we want to have as the fruit of our mission statement. And our portrait of a graduate is a bullet point list of what we think that looks like. It's the vehicle, if you will. We want this to be the fruit, this vision statement to be the fruit. The portrait of the graduate is a description of how that fruit, what it looks like. What color is the apple? What's the taste of it, if you will? And we want there to be apples. Our portrait of a graduate, we want our seniors, our graduates, to humbly recognize their place in Christ's story, to expectantly pursue and cherish all that is true, good, and beautiful, to graciously love their neighbor, especially the most broken and marginalized, to joyfully cultivate and embody a cruciform vision of all of life. And let me just say, if you have a portrait of a graduate and you can't trace how your portrait of a graduate shows up throughout your entire K-12 curriculum, then guess what? I have your strategic plan goals for you right now. It's right here. It's figuring out how to bring these into kindergarten. How do you bring these into your dialectic or logic school or middle school years? What does it look like for our high schoolers? Do we do this perfectly? No. Do we have more work to do in embodying our own portrait of a graduate all the way through K-12? Absolutely. But because one of our commitments is that we want our graduates to graciously love their neighbor, one of the things that we've prioritized in our high school schedule is having our students go and minister in one of the inner city elementary schools teaching science curriculum. We want them to have an opportunity to live out graciously loving their neighbor, especially the most broken and marginalized. We're talking with our athletes about service projects, partnering with one of the churches that we have a relationship with. There's opportunities for service leadership. Go out, find them, talk to people. Whatever your portrait of a graduate statements are, and I've seen, this is on the shorter end. You also see portrait of a graduate statements that are 12 pages long. That's probably the other end of the spectrum. But if you have a full page or two of portrait of a graduate, and maybe it's bullet points, maybe it's more narrative, those are all wonderful, right? But these are your guiding statements. It's your guiding posture. And so if you don't have both mission and vision and portrait of a graduate, it's not that all three of these are necessarily critical, and yet I think there is something really neat about how these three things are woven together. And what they're doing is they're identifying your posture. They're simply mapping out where you're headed, because you can't plan with the end in mind if you don't know what the end is. And so those purpose and outcome statements, that's having the end in mind. And then it's working backwards and planning for having the end in mind. Okay. Let me see. Where do I want to start? How do you go about actually turning your purpose and outcome statements into dreams and ideas? Maybe you know what some of the things are that you need to work on. Maybe you need to go talk to the rest of your school community to go find the things that you need to work on. One of the tools that is pretty commonplace in the business world, and I think our schools can learn from some of those tools that are commonplace in the business world and run with them. One of those tools is called a SWOT analysis. How many of you guys have participated in a SWOT analysis? Okay, so I'll give a brief overview, but basically it's this 4-box grid, and what we're doing is we're thinking about our school's strengths, we're thinking about our school's weaknesses, we're thinking about opportunities, and we're thinking about threats. And so the things that are here, strengths and opportunities, these are helpful to the mission of our school. Our weaknesses and threats are clearly harmful to the mission of our school. And strengths and weaknesses really have to do with things that are internal. This is who you are. These are your strengths and these are your weaknesses. Opportunities and threats have more to do with external forces acting upon your school. What are the opportunities that are out there that you can go out and get? The strengths are the things that are inherent to who you already are. Threats are external in origin. Weaknesses are internal in origin. And you've got this boxy grid. And so going through this sort of exercise, we are filling out one of these grids. You can do it with a department, you can do it with a team, you can do it with your board, you can do it with a group of teachers. If you're getting complaint after complaint about the 5th grade science curriculum, then it might be time to get some science teachers in the room and make sure that the 5th grade science teacher is not the loudest voice in the room, but maybe that's an opportunity for your 5th grade science teacher to hear some of the whole picture and to step outside of themselves and to hear what other science teachers in your school have to say. Here's an interesting thing about doing a SWOT analysis. You will find out really fast who has a strategic perspective. There are the voices who, when you're leading a session or a meeting and you're taking your 15 minutes, they can't get past their 3rd grade last year experience, and every comment is about last year's 3rd grade experience. And what they're really trying to say is, you didn't do your job with supervising your 3rd grade teacher. And you'll find out who's kind of coming from that narrow focus, and you'll find out who's thinking in terms of the broader picture. Nate often talks about the ecosystem of your school. So your most effective SWOT conversations are going to be with people who think in terms of ecosystems, who see the system and understand that their posture is one posture out of many that feed into that ecosystem. But you can also help someone grow in their strategic understanding of the school by surrounding them with other thinkers and giving them an opportunity to hear from a multitude of perspectives. And I think that the best SWOTs, you're guiding the results, but you're allowing the organic development. If you try to do this by yourself, you'll miss things. There will be things that your team members see that you don't see. Everything that they say doesn't have to make it into the final cut of things that you agree with or disagree with, but let the process go and find out what people have to say about what your school strengths are. You might be kind of, that's the really fun part. What are we really good at? Let's celebrate. It might even give you things to very tangibly go out and make sure that you follow up with some other people about, hey, so-and-so was talking about how amazing your literature unit on whatever is. That was so cool that I didn't know that you were doing that. This is amazing. Well done. So guiding the results, but allowing the organic development. I think your board going through this exercise is fabulous. You can do it from the whole school perspective. You can also think about it in terms of a particular department. You can think about it in terms of what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats from the business office side of things, from your finance department. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats coming out of your educational team? These are different voices that see things differently, and you want all of those perspectives. And then kind of the next piece of this is thinking about how these things in these different quadrants come together. You're thinking about your strengths, How do you take advantage of opportunities using those strengths? You're thinking about threats and how existing strengths can respond proactively to those threats before they ever cross your door. You're thinking about weaknesses and if there are opportunities that can overcome a weakness, a felt weakness, and you're looking for where those double whammies come in, a threat that lines up with one of your weaknesses, because that's important to understand where you're at. And this is just a brainstorming tool. This is just a way of, okay, I've got this really pretty box of colors, and what do I do with this pretty box of colors? You can think in these categories to start coming up with what the ideas are. This is an idea generation tool for what you want to be doing with your school, particularly in pursuit of growth, in pursuit of a fresh perspective. Ideas. And this brings out ideas from lots of perspectives and lots of voices. This also brings in a huge pitfall. And that pitfall is having a long, exhausting laundry list of every person's ideas who participated in any of these. And let's say it's your board, and you feel like you can't touch anything that a board member had to say because it came from the board. That is a very dangerous pitfall, to feel like you are tethered to every idea that came up. You must also, with this process, go through pruning. One of the lessons I've learned from pruning fruit trees every spring is that a well-pruned tree, like a well-pruned essay or school, doesn't look pruned, just nicely shaped. None of what has come off is missed after a second glance, nor does any remembrance remain of what the tree looked like beforehand. Pruning does not simply encourage dendritic aesthetics and stimulate fruit production, but allows light and air to penetrate to the center of the tree, discouraging disease and pests. He who pruneth not hateth his tree. So what does that mean, or what does that look like when you've got this long laundry list of things that you should be doing better? How do you prune? Well, one thing, and these are just ideas, run with what makes the most sense. One thing you can do is ruthlessly cut something that you're already doing for any new idea that you bring to the table. We're going to bring in a house system. That means that we need to abandon something else that we're doing because we don't have the resources to assign anyone to oversee something totally from scratch without first freeing them from something else. And so then it becomes really clear when you start prioritizing, okay, we had a lot of good ideas here, but there's only 2 great ideas. There's only 2 ideas that are going to bring new life over and above what we already have. So that's one way to think about this. Another way to think about this is using a budget, and we'll get to that because at the end of the day, a lot of your ideas will cost money. And if your ideas cost too much money, then you're kind of dead in the water and you can't go anywhere. And so having a budget for what your ideas are also allow this prioritization. We only have $6,000 to invest in programmatic growth next year. So we can assign, we can guess, we can brainstorm what we think the dollar value in terms of cost of each of these 12 initiatives is, and we are limited to $6,000 of them. What gets left off the table? Those are the sorts of exercises you can do. I'll get back to that because that's important, but to just acknowledge that pruning is an ongoing essential part of this whole conversation of strategic planning so that you don't have this exhausting laundry list. This is the process that we've gone through in our school. It started with brainstorming through those SWOTs. We had every committee, every team of people do one of these SWOT analyses, and we found out all sorts of things about what people thought. And then we started combining them into one massive massive list of all these different strengths and all these different weaknesses and opportunities and threats. And after we got all those ideas, there was a process where 4 or 5 people sat down in a room and said, yeah, we agree with that. No, we don't agree with that, right? We did some internal pruning before we even spent too much time and energy on this. But then we started asking ourselves what the key priorities were. We had these 50 ideas, and we could kind of summarize most of them with 3 sentences. And so if you do that, like you figure out what your key priorities are, and one way to do this, and again, there's kind of, you can start with your laundry list and then ruthlessly prune, or you can use your and that's legitimate, by the way. Start with a long laundry list and ruthlessly prune until you only have the best ideas left. You can do that. Or you can use your long laundry list to identify themes and run with those themes and leave your laundry list behind. You can come back to your laundry list later. You'll have an opportunity to always go back and check and make sure you didn't miss anything. But if you come up with themes and then you send those themes back out to your team of administrators or committees or to your board, and now you've got these themes that you're starting to plan what your sub-initiatives are. If we want to do X, what are the things that also have to happen? Or how do we break that into 3 or 4 different component parts? And sometimes this is a very kind of straightforward, easy process. One of our strategic priorities right now is building for the future. We're a really fast growing school. This year we started the year with 605. I opened up the admissions spreadsheet this morning and it was 617 currently enrolled. Our projected enrollment for next year is somewhere north of 650, maybe even approaching 700, depending on how many of our applicants actually make it into a seat. And so with that sort of fast growth, we don't have enough classrooms for all those students. So one of our priorities is building for the future. And that's really kind of mechanical and straightforward. We need Midtown High School capacity to be 400 students. We need North Campus capacity to be 600 students. We need South Campus capacity to be another however many students. And by the way, I should have led with this. Our school is a little bit quirky. We do have 3 schools under one school. 3 and 1. There's something biblical about that. We have a North Campus, a South Campus. Those are both K-8 feeder schools going into one high school that's more or less halfway in between. We're totally crazy. That's why we did that. I don't know. It's fun. And if you have a city like Oklahoma City of 670 square miles and you want to reach the whole city, that's one way to do it. So not necessarily wishing upon any of you having a full district. However, you can do that. All that to say, sometimes your strategic priorities are pretty straightforward. One of our other strategic priorities has to do with bringing unhurried wonder into the classroom. And boy, do our teachers have a lot to say about unhurried wonder and how they don't have any of it. We want our teachers to be able to teach Shakespeare and Plato from a place of rest where they are not running around with their hair on fire. We want them to teach like their hair is on fire. That's the name of a book if you haven't read it. There's some good ideas in there. But we don't want them to actually be feeling like their hair is on fire. So you can have really fun sub-initiatives. We were working this exact process with our team, and one of the sub-initiatives that came out was, if our high school students are feeling the weight of the world and they're so stressed out, what do we do differently? One of the ideas that came out was having a J term, some sort of January 2-week or 3-week or 1-week break in between our semesters where we do something totally different with them. Whether or not that makes it into the final execution, I don't know, but the 2 of us got pretty excited about thinking that would be really cool to have a J term. And so whether or not that makes the final cut, we'll find out. It was really cool to have the idea generation put that on the table. At this point, when you've got all of your brainstorming and you've started doing some categorizing and you've got your sub-initiatives and you've got your actions that are attached to those sub-initiatives, and you maybe even start thinking in terms of timelines. Yeah, this is a year 1 priority. Yeah, that's a year 2 priority. Yeah, that's a year 5 priority. We know we want to do it, but I don't know how. And by the way, that is one of your best tools. If you feel like you have to do all of it at once, you will feel like you are drowning, because you will be drowning. You will be drowning in all of these priorities without any sense of which one to start with. And the people who you support daily will feel the weight of being told to do 15 different things and not knowing which one to do first. So you have to prioritize these. And that's also one of your tools for turning a laundry list into a much more planned and systematic, here's year 1, here's where we start, here's year 2, this is how we're going to build on that, here's year 3 where it continues to grow. So you want to be doing your timelines, and you want to be thinking in terms of costs, because if you don't think in terms of costs, you have a wish list. You have the best wish list that you've ever had, and you don't have a way to turn it into a reality unless nothing on your list costs money. And if nothing on your list costs money, you're either really creative, and my hat is off to you, or you're probably not thinking big enough. Some of your initiatives will take money, even if it's simply paying a group of people to work something up in their curriculum over the summer. That's their opportunity to do something fun and new and different with time and space to make it happen. It costs money to bring new ideas to fruition. And so you have to have an understanding of what's reasonable to pay for and what's not reasonable to pay for. And that becomes a critical part of the prioritization process when you've got all these great ideas of how to turn your purpose and outcome statements into realities for your school. You've got these great timelines. You have to assign dollar values and think realistically about what's possible. So, oh, by the way, this is what a grid might start to look like, where you've got a strategic initiative, build for the future, and you've got maybe 3 or 4 goals attached to that strategic initiative, and each one of these goals might have kind of sub-initiatives supporting things that have to happen. If we want to build for the future, we need to expand Midtown Campus. In order to expand Midtown Campus to 400 students, we need to fundraise $4 million. In order to fundraise $4 million, we better start with the silent campaign. Then we better take it public. Then we better, do donor dinners and whatnot and all the other things. And this might be, there's different sort of styles of this, but some level of documenting the big ideas that are supported by smaller ideas that are supported by action items. And because ultimately those action items get assigned to people or to teams, and then you can also start quantifying the timeline. How long will this take, or what year do we kick this off? Who owns this project? And you can start thinking in terms of cost too. So this is one row, right? These are sort of one row in that giant table of strategic planning priorities that you start to surface. So how do you pay for it? How do you intentionally budget for sometimes expensive initiatives? Well, ISM put together a pretty technical Excel spreadsheet that's not complicated, but it's a little bit technical. And so if you want a copy of the spreadsheet, you can scan that URL code, and you don't have to scan it right now because it's on the last slide too. So as I go through this, if you kind of like what you see and you're like, I want to play with that with my school's finances, then you can download and spreadsheet away, because a spreadsheet can be a really helpful tool in thinking about the big picture budget, not just for this year, not just for the next year, but also the year after that, the year after that, the year after that, the year after that. So I want to break down for you some of the key things that you have to be thinking about in order to plan well for paying for expensive priorities. And all of our priorities are expensive, and it's for the children. It's worth it. That's one of Nate's lines. I steal it every once in a while. It's for the children. This is what it looks like. We're going to look through kind of section by section so that I can break it down. One other thing about having this sort of financial plan, there are always things to spend money on. Always. We have an estimated 70 new students coming to our school next year. We have an estimated $750,000 of brand new revenue, and we have $2 million of things that we want to do. So no matter what your scale is, whether your scale is turning $25,000 into reality or your scale is turning $2 million into a reality, there's always more priorities, and a strategic plan can help you remember what your priorities are for those funds. And it can help you also think about when you attach specific hires or specific big ticket expenses, either to a particular census point or a particular place of financial health or to a particular year. And that way, when you have, right now, we have $750,000 to spend next year. Like, hallelujah, schools love this. Okay, well, half of that is new hires to support teachers that we need in order to make those sections for those new students happen. So half of it's gone before we've even started. The next $100,000 is gone to financial aid. And so before we've even touched anything exciting and new, we have lost $400,000. Quote unquote, we have invested $400,000 in a richer, growing school. I would love a secretary. Like, I want an assistant. Nate wants an assistant. That would be fabulous if we could both hire assistants. But if we both do that in the same year, then we're probably doing it at the expense of one of our strategic priorities. And so figuring out exactly what point in time to hire your business manager, to hire your full-time marketing person, to split the 4th, 5th grade class that's been a combined section, whatever it may be. This is one of those tools that helps you keep your priorities in order. Is it the gospel? Of course not. It's only as good as your strategic plan is. And so if you have to throw it out and start over. But understand that that's what you're doing. Understand that you abandoned some prior commitments and some prior expectations. And if it's something that touched on teachers, you're abandoning something that you told teachers you were going to do. And so that's a big ticket item right there. So a tool like this helps keep you on track. By the way, how many of you have told your teachers that you're going to pay them better? Only 2 of you? Okay. Well, I think it's one of the most common promises in schools. We will pay you better. Eventually. Someday. If you don't have great fiscal discipline, it doesn't really happen. It doesn't happen in the amount and proportion that it needs to happen to honor the teachers who are pouring their lives out as sacrificial offerings for their students. Next year, out of that $750,000, I am crossing my fingers that we will be able to use $100,000 in order to improve existing faculty compensation. That's a highly discretionary thing, and it's highly important. It's possible that it'll, at the end of the day, will be $50,000 instead of $100,000. I hope not. We'll see what happens. Because I want our teachers to know that we care about them and that we're not providing an education purely on their backs without also deeply loving them even as they pour out love to their students. Okay, here we go. Ready? First part, you do have to have some sense of enrollment expectations. ISM would tell you, whatever this year's enrollment is, just assume that it won't change for 5 years. I think that's kind of short-sighted. Some of you are in shrinking schools. Some of you are in rapidly expanding and growing schools. And so you need to have some sort of expectation for where your school will be census-wise. That's our term, census, for 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 years from now. You can guess. And on some level, all of this is guesswork because it's a crystal ball. So it's just as effective as predicting the stock market, which is to say it's not. Except, generally speaking, over time, the stock market does go up. And so if someone says, yeah, the stock market's going to go up, and I can look at the past 20 years to have some expectation of what the average over the next 20 years will be, and those people have, on the whole, been right, even if they are wrong in a particular year or a particular day. I don't recommend that you use 20 years of enrollment history because a lot of things change, but I do recommend that you use 2 years of enrollment history if you can. 3 years is better. If you only use 1 year of data, that's great. And if you only have 1 year of data, then you only have 1 year of data. But if you can do 2 or 3 years, or if you can latch it on to a change in your school, 3 years ago, the school, the Academy of Classical Christian Studies hiked tuition roughly 25%. And there was a lot of attrition, and the following year the budget worked. So using that year of heavy attrition is not a good year for us to assume is any application to the future, because we're not increasing tuition 25% every year. We increase tuition for next year by 3%. And so you want to think about the years that are representative. Maybe it's the past 2 years, maybe it's the past 3 years. There's a lot of easy ways to do this. Here's an example of a K through 8 school where I've got a whole bunch of years. This is actually these are genuine census numbers from a school, starting from when they were 17 students, and this was the total number of new students, and then this was the new students that they were adding each year. And here's they were 5 second graders that year. Okay, and so you can have one of these grids, and with a pretty simple Excel formula, you can come up with what your average 2-year or 3-year enrollment is. This is not just enrollment. This is new students by grade. I can come up with my average new 8th graders, average new 5th graders, etc. And then, if I'm going to talk about new students, I need to talk about attrition. Come up with my average attrition by grade. So this is the history. At the bottom here, I've got my average 3 years. So with the new students, average 3 years, and attrition, average 3 years. I can take where I am now, I can apply those. It's a pretty simple math problem, and I can come up with my grid where I'm thinking, okay, here's my actual historical data, and then these are what I call, this is my imaginary data. So it's my imaginary years kind of going into the future, and I can think about, based on the past 3 years, what's going to come next. Anyone want to guess why there are some red cells in here? If you can't read the number, it's 32. Can anyone guess why there's some red 32s showing up? In fact, more and more of them.
You split classes at that number? Or?
It's actually when that grade level, when that class was full.
Oh, okay.
16-to-1 ratio, 2 sections per grade was what the building was built for. And so that's going to put a damper on future growth. And so whether you do that manually or if you have enough technical know-how to turn that into a formula that does that, either way, but you have to make sure that you don't over-project past your actual capacity. Okay, you take that and you can come up with what your enrollment numbers are. So here's my enrollment going into the future. In a different part of the table, it's actually the very bottom, I've got tuition numbers. So when I take the enrollment times tuition, what do I get? I get my gross tuition revenue. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's just a simple multiplication problem. And then when you have your gross tuition, then you have your subtractions. Financial aid is the biggest subtraction that we all have. You may have other subtractions as well. Financial aid's the biggest one. So we actually look at tuition, we look at financial aid as a percentage. If you don't know what your percentage that goes to financial aid is, you should calculate it. And you should make sure that every year it stays at least at that level unless the board is intentionally increasing or intentionally decreasing. And so now I've got my net tuition revenue, and there you go. There's other hard income as well. Other hard income are your activity fees. Now, if it's purely an in and out thing, like the $9 you collect to go to the zoo, That's purely in and out. Like, just leave that aside. Don't let that mess with your table. But other hard income might be application fees. It might be re-enrollment fees, book fees. If there are large fees that are supporting your operations, then you need to recognize that you've got that income. You also can ask yourself whether or not going into the future that is going to grow or stay the same. Tuition usually goes up every year. Fees usually don't go up every year. So right here, this is all in a spreadsheet that you can download afterwards. But this is a formula where I'm checking to see, actually not checking, I'm dictating how much my hard income is going to grow. And in this year, 3 years from now, we're going to have a growth spurt in our fees. We're not going to do that every year, but 3 years from now, we're going to take all of our fees up by 5% or whatever it is, right? So then you've got your total hard income, because you had your, the earlier was that net income of total tuition minus financial aid. Now we're adding in some hard income, and now I've got our total hard income. And because we've already articulated what we think enrollment's going to be over 5 years, we can articulate what we think total hard income is going to be over 5 years. And yes, it's all multiplied by tuition. We haven't gotten to the tuition part yet. It's all baked in though. Okay, and then here's the fun one. Here's your budget. Operational expenses. You start with just what's the current operational expense budget, right? You plug that number in, and then you ask yourself, how much is that going to grow? The cost of paper clips goes up. CPI, generally speaking, has been on average 2 to 3%. The past few years, it's been more on the 1 to 2% side. If coronavirus kills all of our schools, then maybe it'll be negative 1%. I don't know. But there's some level of inflation that you need to bake in. And a good way to think about this is, what's your baseline for how much of a raise you're going to give your teachers? Because if you want to give your teachers a 1% raise, great. Then leave inflation at 1%. Probably you want to be giving your teachers 2 or 3 or higher % raise, and so you need to factor in an inflationary increase that's at least as much as that, because that's most of your operational expense is payroll. So then you've got, again, this is all formula driven, you've got a projected total operational budget with this inflationary impact, but the other thing that we have added in are strategic items. And this is where these two conversations, the planning and the finances, this row right here is where they get married. Because you've already figured out a price tag for your strategic priorities. You know that next year you want to hire a dedicated, student life, discipleship-oriented dean. Wonderful. You've already figured out, we're going to offer them a starting salary of $48,000, and so you take your $48,000, you factor in your payroll taxes, and you know that you need to have $52,000 into an add, if you will, into your operational budget. So that's what this strategic items does, is it looks at the adds that you know that you're planning on incorporating, and it adds them into your operational expenses. So you've got your inflationary increases, and you've got your strategic increases, and it bakes into this formula so you get your total operating budget. Earlier we had our total hard income, now we have our total operating budget. We subtract one from the other, we get our hard income profit and loss, P&L. For many of you, this is a negative number. For us, it's a negative number, because guess what? What else do we do? Oh, come on, guys. We fundraise, right? You start in a hole and you fundraise your way out of it, with some amount of prayer and crossing your fingers that it all works out in the end. So if this hard income is a deficit, that's not surprising. There's another little math problem here to find out what % of your budget is covered by hard income. That's reliable income. Fundraising is soft income. Hard income is tuition and fees. Soft income is not reliable. Hard income is reliable in proportion to your census, in proportion to the number of students. So when you've got your hard income % coverage dropping below 90%, you probably need to have a really serious conversation about your model as a school. There are schools out there that fundraise the entire budget. It's wonderful. And if you've got some deep pockets who are making that happen for you, go to town. That's great. It's really tough for most schools to fundraise more than 5 to 10%. And I'll leave it at that. There you go. So again, this is all just math problems that are behind the scenes. And this is, by the way, that strategic initiatives line was being fed by another set of numbers where I was thinking about, okay, next year we need to split grades. And the year after that, we need to split 3 grades instead of 2 grades. And we know that in year 2, we want to hire a development officer. In year 1, we're building a new building, so we're going to have $40,000 of new utility costs that we're going to have to absorb into the budget. We know that 4 years, or 3 years from now, we want to hire a business manager, some other initiative in year 5 for $250,000, whatever, right? These total, or not, sorry, 25,000, not 250. So all of these get added up. Here's your year 1 increases, $105,000. That's this $105,000 right here. And the formula turns this $105,000 and bakes it into your next year operational expense. So in terms of understanding the long-term expectations, if you hire someone, right, unless you're firing them after 1 year, which, okay, that's fun, you have to be able to factor in sustaining that initiative into the future. Now, you do have 1-year initiatives, so that's its own thing. But most of your biggest ticket costs are perpetual costs, unless you're discontinuing a program, and so you have to factor that in. Okay, so there was the strategic initiatives page, and this is the summary of your expense column in that strategic plan, thinking about what you're going to do in different years. And then you get the fundraising. Our model is what we call Giving Society. We want to get as many people as we can to give $1,000 a year with a 5-year commitment. Lots of different fundraising models out there, whatever you want to do. Our goal is to bring our Giving Society percent of tuition over time to 5%. It's not the only thing we do. We have an auction too, right? You can have your golf fundraiser, whatever it may be. That's another whole series of talks. And maybe your percentages here are 10 or 15 or 20. But you can have some intentionality around how much fundraising you're expecting to do. Maybe you keep the whole thing flat because you want to be kind of ultra conservative, or maybe you want to have benchmarks based on a percent of budget. Different ways you can set this up. After we've added in that fundraising number, we get our annual overall P&L, profit and loss. And then the board comes in and they spend money. They want to do a $50,000 bonus. They're not promising to do a bonus every year, but they're going to go ahead and do a bonus this year. And so they subtract $50,000 right out of the gate. But whatever the difference is, whatever the remainder is, $112,000 was the P&L in this year, and these were sort of fake numbers, so don't get freaked out if yours doesn't look anything like this. It was based on real numbers, but then I was making it more interesting and more fun by plugging in some more extreme things. And so then, maybe we started with $20,000 in the bank account, but after we had an annual P&L of 112, and then we spent 50, and we ended up with $62,000 in the bank at the end of the year. Sorry, 62,000 is the amount that's left over from the 112 after we've done some spending from the board, and then we have our total cumulative reserves of 82,000. Right now, full disclosure, our total cumulative reserves are a deficit number. And that may be the story of your school as well. You may be digging out of a hole. You can use a tool like this to find the fiscal discipline to dig yourself out of that hole over the course of 3 years or 5 years or whatever it may be. And then there's the tuition. How much are you going to increase tuition? Because really, there's only 3 ways to get more money in your school. Increase tuition, increase the number of students, do more fundraising. So if you've kind of exhausted the fundraising barrel, and you don't seem to be growing, then the only thing that's left is increasing tuition, right? So factor in a tuition cost that at least keeps up with the cost of living increase that's aligned with your cost of living expectations. And this is just a track of what the tuition rates are after we've multiplied it out by 2% or 3% or 5% or whatever it is. All of this spreadsheet that I've just kind of talked to you through, all it is a calculator. All it is one giant grid of variables. And so if you're trying to figure out, can we spend $40,000 on this or that or the other thing, you plug in $40,000 for your strategic initiative and you start figuring out how many students would we have to have in order for that to be viable? How many students would we have to have in order to commit to trimming something from our strategic plan? How much tuition would we have to increase in order to make that possible by year 4? This is one of the most powerful tools in overcoming, we have to do everything at once, and one of the most powerful tools in overcoming, well, we absolutely can't set tuition higher than $6,000. How many of you have heard some flavor of we absolutely cannot increase tuition over X, whether that was $2,000 or $10,000? And you know what? That's true for this year. You can't. But in a 5-year plan, you might have to. And even a relatively small 2% increase over the next 5 years might push you over that milestone. And if you're having that conversation and to understand things do go up in cost over the coming years, you can start to overcome that conversation of we absolutely can't raise tuition over that particular price point. Best uses in all of that grid, one of them is helping the board set tuition. We really want you to hire a business manager. We really want you to hire, we want 12-to-1 ratios. We cannot have more than 12 students in a class. Well, you can figure out what that's going to cost, and you can figure out how much you're going to have to set tuition at in order to make that happen. And then you have the calculator, right? You know what you're up against if you're going down that path. So this is merely a tool for setting tuition, for figuring out how to pay for the really cool thing, and for tracking finances from the 10,000 feet. Because I can look at the entire school's financial health and forecast it for 5 years in one page without wading through pages and pages of P&L statements and balance sheets that, quite frankly, I'm not an accountant. I get lost in those. I can follow, I can study this one page, and I can dig in and figure out this one page without ever sweating the balance sheet. And if you've got board members who have no financial background, you can start bringing them along into a one-pager that helps them understand the whole picture. As long as you've got 1 or 2 on the board who really have the background to understand this and can help you set the variables and the expectations, that's your finance committee. You can use them to help get it set up and then explain to the rest of your board how this works and why tuition should be increased by 3%.